Martha Burke, but her maiden name was Martha Johnson.
Could you tell me that one more time?
Martha Johnson.
About your great-grandfather?
My great-grandfather's name was Robert Burke, and his wife's name, and my great-grandmother's name was Martha Burke. But her maiden name was Martha Johnson, and they were from Farmville, Rice, Virginia.
How did they come up to Tacony?
They came up here based upon Mr. Diston, who was a property owner. He had businesses and he brought families up to work for him in the community. And some of our family members were part of that. But my great-grandfather was a sharecropper, and my great-grandmother was a school teacher. So they pretty much, they on their own. They had their own business. My great-grandmother, she graduated from Hampton College in 1898.
Wow.
And when she came up established, and she had several brothers and sisters, the Johnson family of Farmville. They didn't come up, but their children came up because my great-grandmother was, a communication for them to come up, to come up north.
To get the jobs at Diston?
To get the jobs and to live up here, yeah. And several.
What was the draw for this versus
the draw was
Farmville?
the opportunity. The draw was the opportunity to get work, work in factories, work on the fields. That was the draw.
Okay.
Actually, years ago, there was a project over on Tacony Street that had most families who was from that county. And when they tore the projects down, they migrated. Some stayed in Frankfurt, some came to Tacony, and some came to Holmesburg.
So they came here, they came together as family units?
It was a family unit because it was from the same communities in Farmville and Prince Edward County. And they came up here with the same communication level, the same they were familiar with one another. So they came up here with that, with knowing one another. And they were faith-based. Because there was a time where it was a 7-mile radius where Mr. Diston wouldn't allow any bars or alcohol or anything, alcohol or anything in a 7-mile radius because he respected their faith, their faith. He respected their worship of God.
So he created a dry environment.
He created an environment and a boundary that respected their faith.
What was it like being working for Diston as a black worker versus working as a white worker?
Actually, they passed on, my older aunts and my grandmother could tell you more deeper. They're not here, but what it was just an opportunity to leave from where they were to come up here.
So how were they treated? Were they treated equally or were they treated
They were treated
fairly?
They were treated fairly, because he really put a lot of stock and appreciated the work that they did.
Okay.
And he gave them opportunity to save money so they can bring their families up. And that's how the community began to start.
Okay.
Now, coming from, not to be religious, but coming from a prophetic standpoint, there was a purpose as to why Star of Hope, a lot of storefront churches, when they closed up or they destroyed the buildings, that was it. But there was a purpose for the families, as far as Star of Hope that came up, for them to plant it here because it was for them to evangelize the community.
Were there already black people here?
There were not many.
Okay.
This was the black community surrounded by, a lot of, this was a white community. And the black, we were just like a little spot in the middle.
Okay.
And sometimes they say the blacks is between the railroad and the river, which is stereotype, but sometimes the reality, that's what it is. But what happened was, because of the faith of the families and the way they study, and you've heard the term, it takes a village to raise a child. They were so close-knit because if they weren't blood family, they were family based upon the community. In association, in the familiar, we would eat in each other's houses.
Right.
His grandmother would cook for, if you got in trouble, you called down the street. You was in trouble before you got down there. Before you got to your home. So there was a line of communication. It was a close communication that we did. and that's what made it a community. What happened was we started going to school with whites, and some of the whites, there were fights.
So the Tacony schools were integrated?
Well, Distant, I have an aunt who's 80 years old. She went to Distant. My grandmother went to Distant. My grandma would be 100 now. They went to Distant. And you was talking about maybe four blacks in the whole school, in the whole school, in elementary and in high school, because a lot of the blacks here, and then a lot of my family, they graduated from Lincoln High School. So Lincoln was populated by, the family. Wasn't a whole lot of blacks, but the blacks that were there, most of them were either related to me, or they were they were in close contact, because their families grew up together.
Right.
So say, for instance, their grandmothers and grandfathers went to school or worked alongside. Now, there also, the other history on it is that Uniroyal, where the lofts are, that used to be Uniroyal.
Gas company?
No, right here on Keystone Street. There's a building on Keystone that goes, it starts here on Keystone and goes across Cotman, overpass. They're lost now, but they used to be Uniroyal, the rubber factory.
Oh, the rubber factory.
Yeah, they used to send rubber on. Now, a lot of our family members worked there for years, too.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, making tires.
Making tires and belts and everything.
Okay.
And a lot of them were a part of the congregation of Star of Hope. Okay. So whenever they would go to work, save up, go to work, save their money, put it in the bank, and they would come to Star of Hope, because it was such close, because they could walk up to church.
Right. They probably could walk to work too.
They walk
to see your family.
Because there used to be so much noise that we could hear the noise from the start of the workday to the end.
The noise from the sawmills and the rubber mill.
From the machines going.
Really? Would you hear them all the way up here?
Yeah, because our house, we lived across the street from there.
What did it sound
My
like?
family, the Burke family lived across the street. It was
all day?
As a kid, we could hardly go to sleep.
Oh my God.
During the daytime, summertime, But the fun was that they used to throw rubber out the window. Rubber that wasn't used, so we used that, and we would have rubber fights. Rubber belt fights.
That's funny. I bet you those hurt, right?
As kids.
Stack you with some rubber, that's going to hurt.
Yeah, but there was so much love. But what happens is, like I said, not from a more spiritual standpoint, that was the love that was developed here. And that's what, and I truly know that's what God intended for Star of Hope to be a center point, a hub of faith, not just for us as family who went to church, but to evangelize, to tell the community about the goodness of how God is in their life. Because even though some of the, I guess, some of the fights we had and all that, but we started getting along with the whites in the community, because they started understanding and knowing us and our families. Some of our family members went to school with some of the older people in the community. So they went to school. So some of them, they went to school, my grandmother, my grandma. Because my grandfather and my grandmother, his name was Robert Frederick Burke. That was his name, Robert Frederick Burke. And my grandmother's name was Martha Burke. They had 7 kids. There was my Uncle Freddie, Uncle Frederick Burke. His name was Frederick Douglass Burke, Uncle Freddie. There was my aunt Annette Nash, Clara Burke, Martha Burke, and Eleanor Burke. That's what they were 5. There was the 5. They grew up. Now the only one who was born in Virginia was Frederick. In 1914 is when they moved up here. Okay. My Uncle Frederick, he was born in Virginia. He moved up, but once they got here, the rest of the family were born.
So I noticed that the cornerstone said founded 1918, and I'm wondering if you can walk me through the founding to today.
Well, I don't know all the history, but I know what happened was the founding started actually from them worshiping down south. So when they came up, they came with that faith. One thing they hung on to was faith in Jesus Christ. That was the main purpose of their survival, of their life, of a family unit. You know, their worship of God. You know, and behind that, there were so many tragedies the family went through, so many losses, but they hanging on to their faith kept them afloat.
Right. And then when they moved up here, then the church started in 1918. And did it start as just in someone's home and then move to a building, or how did that work?
My understanding, and we have to get back to this. Don't mark it. I believe it started as Bible study in homes,
right?
And then they went and got a storefront,
right?
Because we have a history book. That, you know, of the anniversary of our 100th year anniversary that talks about everyone.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
All the pastors and everything. That's why I said.
Awesome.
Yeah, all the pastors that started, you know, the pastors who baptized my mother,
right,
my grandmother, and all of them. We're talking over 100-something years ago. You know, who started off, and one of the youngest pastors that was here, his name was Reverend Thompson. He passed away at a very early age. I think he passed away, he was like 39 or something like that. Yeah. I can get that information to you, but yeah.
Okay, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, this is I'm gonna stop